My name is Margaret Hill. I am 68 years old, a widow, and the woman sitting alone on a sofa in a condo that no longer feels like hers. I know exactly how that sounds, but on Christmas Eve, that was my reality. I was still wearing my coat, my purse resting on my lap, the strap twisted around my fingers like I was holding on to something solid. The Christmas lights along the window blinked softly, reflecting off the glass, calm and cheerful in a way that felt almost mocking. From the dining room, I could smell rosemary and butter, hear forks scraping plates, hear laughter rise and fall as if it belonged to someone else's life. I wasn't invited to the table. I hadn't been told to leave either. I had simply been moved aside. Then I heard my brother Robert's voice near the front door. He had driven all day to be here, and his voice carried that tired sharpness that comes from long roads and longer worries. "Where's my sister?" For a moment, no one answered. I held my breath without realizing it. My son Daniel finally spoke. His voice was steady, almost casual, the way people sound when they believe they're being reasonable. "She's out," he said. "Lauren doesn't like having her around." The words didn't register at first. I tilted my head slightly, as if that might rearrange them into something kinder. Robert didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You sent her outside?" he asked. Daniel laughed softly, and that laugh hurt more than the words had. "It's fine. Mom gets dramatic. Lauren deserves a peaceful holiday." Peaceful. I stared at the empty chair I had set out earlier that afternoon, the one I'd imagined sitting in with a plate balanced on my knees. In the dining room, someone lifted a glass and said, "Cheers." And the room responded like a chorus. No one noticed I wasn't there. I felt something settle deep in my chest, heavy and unmistakable. This wasn't about Christmas dinner. It wasn't about personalities or misunderstandings or hurt feelings that could be smoothed over with time. This was about my place, about whether I was still a mother or just an inconvenience that could be moved out of sight when it no longer fit the picture. As I sat there, listening to my family celebrate without me, I understood something that made my hands tremble. If I didn't speak up, if I didn't draw a line I had avoided drawing for far too long, I wasn't just going to lose this holiday. I was going to lose my home. 3 years earlier, my life had already been shrinking, even if I didn't yet have the words for it. After my husband died, the house went quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like a room holding its breath. Mornings were the hardest. I would wake up before the alarm out of habit, reach for the other side of the bed, and remember all over again that there was no reason to rush. No coffee already brewing. No newspaper folded at the edge of the table. I kept busy because stillness felt dangerous. I cleaned rooms that didn't need cleaning. I reorganized drawers that already made sense. I told myself that if I stayed useful, I would stay anchored. Daniel started calling more often back then. At first, those calls felt like a gift. He was my only child, and hearing his voice made the house feel less empty. He asked how I was doing, how the house was holding up, whether I'd eaten. I clung to those small check-ins more than I care to admit. Then one evening, he asked if he could stop by with Lauren. It was raining hard that night. I remember because Daniel didn't bother taking off his shoes when he came in. Water dripped onto the rug my husband and I had bought years earlier, and I noticed it in the detached way you notice things when you know something important is coming. Daniel didn't sit. He stood in the entryway, hands jammed into his jacket pockets, jaw tight. Lauren stayed just behind him, polite smile in place, eyes moving slowly around my living room as if she were taking inventory. "Mom," Daniel said, exhaling sharply, "I messed up." He talked fast, like if he didn't, He might lose his nerve. A side project. Extra work on nights and weekends. A deal that collapsed at the worst possible moment. He tried to fix it. He tried to cover it. The numbers only grew. When he finally said the amount out loud, it felt like the air changed. $120,000. I didn't interrupt him. I watched his hands shake as he spoke. I noticed how Lauren stepped in smoothly, finishing sentences for him when his voice faltered. "He's exhausted," she said gently. "He's barely sleeping." Daniel nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. "I feel like I'm drowning." I asked him what he needed. I thought he would ask for help budgeting, or time, or advice. I thought foolishly that this was about guidance. Lauren glanced down the hallway instead, toward the bedrooms, toward the walls that held decades of my life. "If you sold the house," she said carefully, "you could downsize. You don't need all this space anymore. It would be safer for you too, less to manage." Safer. That word stuck. I had already slipped once on the back steps the previous winter. I remembered lying there in the cold for a moment, staring up at the sky, wondering what would happen if no one heard me fall next time. I said no, not loudly, not angrily, just no. Daniel's face crumpled in a way that made my chest ache. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just looked at me like I'd let him down. "You're the only one who can help me," he said. "I don't know what else to do." I should have paused. I should have asked for time. I should have listened to the quiet voice inside me, warning that desperation makes people careless. Instead, I thought about how empty the house felt. I thought about how silence had become my constant companion. I thought about my son, scared and ashamed, standing in front of me. So I sold the house. I watched strangers walk through the rooms where my husband and I had built a life. They commented on the lighting, the floors, the layout, as if memory were something that could be appraised and priced. On closing day, I signed papers with hands that didn't feel like my own and wrote a check that erased my son's debt. I told myself it was what mothers did. I bought a small condo in a quiet complex, all on one level, close enough to neighbors that I wouldn't feel completely alone. It wasn't home yet, but I believed it could become one. Daniel hugged me in the parking lot when I moved in. He promised he and Lauren would help me settle. He promised they'd be around. 2 weeks later, he called again. "Just for a little while," he said carefully, "until we get back on our feet. Could we stay with you?" I stood in my new kitchen, staring at bare counters and unopened boxes. The place still smelled like fresh paint and cardboard. It felt temporary, unfinished. There was a pause, a small one, the kind that carries a lot of weight if you let it. Then I said yes. At first, it felt comforting to have people around again. Daniel filled the space with noise. Lauren kept things tidy. I told myself I was lucky. I told myself this was family. But somewhere in those early weeks, without any announcement or argument, something shifted. Decisions stopped including me. My routines bent to fit theirs. My voice grew quieter, not because I wanted it to, but because it felt like the only way to keep peace. I didn't recognize it as the beginning of something darker. I thought it was just adjustment. I thought it was temporary. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. That was the moment I stopped being the owner of my home and started becoming a guest in it. And I had no idea how much it would cost me to stay. Living together didn't fall apart all at once. That's what made it so easy to explain away. In the beginning, it almost felt like a second chance. Daniel fixed a loose cabinet door without being asked. He carried groceries in and joked about how small my kitchen was compared to the old house. Some evenings, the three of us sat on the couch eating takeout, and I let myself believe that selling my home had bought me something more than silence. Lauren was polite, measured, efficient. She wiped counters the moment a crumb appeared. She stacked shoes neatly by the door. She spoke in a calm, even voice that made everything she said sound reasonable, even when it wasn't. The first time she moved something, it was easy to ignore. I came into the living room one morning and noticed my husband's photo was gone from the side table. My heart jumped, sharp and sudden. I checked the shelf, the windowsill, the console by the television. Lauren glanced up from her phone. "Oh, I put it in your bedroom," she said. "It's more personal there." I found it on the dresser, angled slightly toward the wall. Not hidden, just relocated, as if my grief needed to be contained. I told myself it was nothing. Then the kitchen began to change. Lauren bought matching containers and reorganized my cabinets. She threw out old spices because they looked cluttered. She replaced my dish towels with plain gray ones that matched her taste. Every time I hesitated, Daniel would say, "It's fine, Mom. She's just helping." It was never one big thing. It was dozens of small ones. Small enough that complaining would make me sound petty. Small enough that I swallowed it. Then Evelyn started coming by. Lauren's mother arrived one afternoon with a grocery bag and the confidence of someone who didn't feel like a guest. I walked in behind her and froze when I saw her sitting at my kitchen table, a cigarette between her fingers. Smoke curled toward the ceiling like a quiet insult. "I'm sorry," I said, because I was raised to soften situations even when I was uncomfortable. "Would you mind not smoking inside?" Evelyn took a drag and shrugged. "It's just one." Lauren appeared behind her, coffee mug in hand, perfectly relaxed. "She's just unwinding," she said. "Don't make it a big deal." When Daniel came home, I expected him to notice the smell, my expression, the tension in the room. Instead, he looked at Lauren first, then at me. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we not start something today?" That sentence changed everything. After that, Evelyn came more often. She left her shoes on my rug. She turned my television up loud. She laughed and called me sensitive when I didn't laugh along. Lauren began inviting people over without asking, a coworker stopping by, a cousin in town. Every knock on the door made the condo feel smaller. They framed it as normal. "That was the hardest part," Lauren would say. "We're family." Whenever she wanted something. Daniel nodded along, like family meant my boundaries didn't count. One evening, when Lauren was in the shower, I tried to talk to Daniel alone. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands folded, the same way I used to sit when he was a teenager and I needed him to listen. "This is my home," I said carefully. "I feel like I'm being pushed out." He stared at the wood grain as if it might give him an answer. "You're not being pushed out," he said. "You just don't like change." "I don't like being ignored," I said, and I hated the way my voice shook. When he finally looked up, I didn't see anger. I saw exhaustion, the kind that makes people choose the easiest path instead of the right one. "Lauren's under a lot of pressure," he said. "Can you just make this easier?" Make this easier. It wasn't a request for patience. It was a request for silence. After that conversation, my routines shifted without discussion. I ate later because the kitchen felt occupied. I retreated to my bedroom when Evelyn was there. I slept on the sofa just for one night when they had guests, because it felt simpler than asking for respect and being told I was overreacting. One night, standing in the hallway, I heard Evelyn laugh and say, "She'll adjust. They always do." Like I was a type, not a person. I went to bed with a heavy feeling in my chest, not because I didn't love my son, but because I was starting to understand something painful. Love wasn't protecting me here. And if I kept telling myself this was temporary, I was going to wake up one day and realize I'd been erased without anyone raising their voice. Thanksgiving arrived without asking whether I was ready for it. Lauren was already awake when I came into the kitchen that morning. She moved with purpose, opening cabinets, setting out serving dishes, checking her phone every few minutes as if she were coordinating something larger than a meal. The counter filled up quickly, and I found myself stepping aside more than once to avoid being in the way. "Lauren's family is coming by," Daniel said, appearing behind me. "How many?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He hesitated, just long enough for me to notice. "A few." A few turned into 12. By late morning, coats were draped over the backs of my chairs, shoes crowded my entryway, and voices filled every corner of the condo. Evelyn arrived first, loud and hungry, sweeping into the kitchen as if she were inspecting it. Lauren greeted her with a kiss and handed her a drink without asking. I introduced myself to people as they came in, smiling until my face felt stiff. I moved between the kitchen and the living room, carrying bowls, checking the oven, refilling glasses. Staying busy felt safer than standing still. When it was time to sit down, something happened without anyone saying a word. The chair at the head of the table, the one my husband used to sit in, was taken by Evelyn. Lauren sat beside her, laughing. Daniel sat across from them, relaxed, at ease in a way I hadn't seen in months. I stood there holding the gravy boat, waiting for someone to notice there wasn't a place for me. No one did. Lauren glanced up and said, "Margaret, can you start bringing plates?" It wasn't the request that hurt. It was the certainty in her voice, like my role had already been decided. I set plates down quietly, slipping between chairs, careful not to bump anyone. Conversation flowed around me as if I were part of the furniture. Halfway through the meal, Evelyn leaned back and said loudly, "Margaret's lucky we're here. Keeps her busy." People laughed. Even Daniel smiled, the kind of smile meant to smooth things over. Something in me went cold. After dinner, I stood at the sink with my hands in soapy water, listening to laughter drift in from the living room. A plate slipped and cracked against the sink, the sound sharp and humiliating. Daniel walked in and frowned. "Careful," he said, like I was a child. "I'm tired," I said quietly. Lauren's voice carried from the living room. "Christmas Eve might be easiest here," she said. "Everyone can come. Here. My home." She said it like a conclusion, not a suggestion. That night, after the guests left, I sat alone on the sofa in the dark. The condo was quiet again, but it didn't feel peaceful. It felt claimed. I thought about the check I'd written, the house I'd sold, the way sacrifice turns into entitlement when no one checks it. Over the next few weeks, the unspoken rules became clearer. Lauren kept the condo key on her ring. "Just in case," she said, smiling. Evelyn referred to my living room as our space. Daniel started saying "we" when talking about decisions, and I slowly realized I wasn't included in that word anymore. One afternoon, I came home with groceries and found a folder on the counter. Lauren sat at my table, flipping through papers like she owned more than the furniture. "What's that?" I asked. "Just information," she said. "Planning ahead." "For what?" She met my eyes, pleasant but firm. "For when things get harder. For you." The words made my stomach tighten. I set the groceries down slowly, my hands shaking. After that, Lauren watched me more closely. If I misplaced my glasses, she'd comment lightly. If I paused to remember something, she'd offer help that felt more like a record being kept. One evening, I passed the hallway and heard her on the phone. "She forgets things," Lauren said. "It could be unsafe. We should talk to someone about options." Options. The word echoed in my head long after she hung up. When she saw me, she smiled. Could you not wander around at night? It worries Daniel. Wander. I wanted to confront my son, to demand to know what he'd agreed to. But every time I looked at him, I saw how he deferred to Lauren, how his certainty seemed borrowed from her confidence. Christmas Eve came faster than I expected. I tried to make the condo feel warm. I set out the ceramic tree my husband and I had bought years ago. I plugged in the lights. I laid out napkins with holly leaves because tradition had always been my way of saying I mattered. Daniel came in with grocery bags and handed them straight to Lauren. She directed him without a word, and he followed. Lauren's family arrived in a rush of noise and perfume. Evelyn walked straight into my kitchen and poured herself a drink. Dinner came together quickly, chairs filling before I could claim one. I hovered at the edge of the dining room, waiting for Daniel to notice me. He didn't. So I sat on the sofa instead, coat still on, purse in my lap, because I didn't know what else to do with myself. That's when the front door opened and my brother Robert's voice cut through the room. "Where's my sister?" The silence that followed felt heavy and electric, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than fear. I felt seen. Robert didn't wait for anyone to answer him. He stepped fully into the condo, travel bag still in one hand, eyes moving slowly from the crowded table to the sofa where I sat with my coat on. When he saw me like that, something tightened in his jaw. He didn't look angry yet. He looked focused, which was worse. "Margaret," he said gently, "why aren't you sitting down?" Before I could answer, Daniel spoke up, a little too quickly. "She's fine. She just wanted some quiet." Robert turned to him. "Did she say that?" Daniel hesitated. Just a second. But it was enough. Lauren straightened her shoulders. "She gets overwhelmed," she said calmly. "We're just trying to keep things peaceful." Robert nodded slowly, like he was filing that away. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. "I've driven 8 hours to be here," he said. "Not for dinner, for my sister." The room went quiet in that uneasy way people get when they realize something has shifted. Robert looked at Daniel. "Do you know what elder abuse looks like?" Daniel blinked. "What are you talking about?" Robert didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "It looks like someone being pushed out of their own home. It looks like someone being told they're confused when they're not. And it looks like plans being made without their consent." Lauren's smile stiffened. "This is ridiculous." Robert held up his phone. "I heard enough last week to stop pretending." That's when Daniel's face changed. Not anger, not disbelief, fear. "What did you hear?" he asked. Robert's eyes never left Lauren. "Enough about options, enough about paperwork, enough about how convenient it would be if my sister wasn't making decisions anymore." Evelyn stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "This is a misunderstanding." Robert finally looked at her. "Then you won't mind leaving." Lauren opened her mouth. Robert spoke first. "Everyone who doesn't live here needs to go. Now." No one argued. Not really. The confidence drained out of the room as coats were grabbed and chairs pushed back. Evelyn walked past me without a word. Lauren paused at the door, waiting for Daniel. He didn't follow. When the door closed, the silence felt different, lighter, like a pressure had lifted. Daniel stood there, hands shaking. "Mom," he said, "I didn't know it was like that." I stood up slowly. My legs felt weak, but my voice didn't. "This is my home," I said, "and from now on, I decide who stays." He nodded, tears in his eyes. Robert stayed with me that night. In the weeks that followed, he helped me change the locks, organize my documents, and talk to a lawyer about protecting what was mine. Daniel moved out. Not in a dramatic fight, just quietly, like someone realizing they no longer belonged. Months later, he came back alone. He told me he was in therapy. He told me he was sorry. I listened. I didn't forgive him right away. I gave him boundaries instead. By summer, I sold the condo and moved closer to Robert. On my first morning there, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, sunlight warming the table. For the first time in years, I felt safe. And I finally understood something. Love doesn't mean enduring whatever someone does to you. Love means knowing when to stand your ground, even when the person you're standing up to is your own child.